At 8, my parents left me at a bus station. A stranger stayed, and only after he died did I learn he left me $3.8 million. My parents came back to sue me. In court, they smirked. "I'll be representing myself." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the pen scratching across the clerk's notepad 3 rows back. I adjusted the sleeve of my blazer, took a slow, deep breath, and looked straight ahead at the gallery. My mother, Evelyn, the woman I haven't called that in 22 years. She was seated in the second row, wearing a navy blue dress she must have bought specifically for today. Something respectable. Something that screamed grieving family. Next to her sat my father, Arthur, his posture stiff, his eyes darting around the room. And right behind them was Wyatt, my younger brother, the golden boy. He leaned back on the wooden bench, arms crossed over his expensive suit, a sickening, arrogant smirk plastered across his face. They thought they had won. They thought I was still that terrified 8-year-old kid they threw away. They looked at the plaintiff's table like they had already cashed the check. Then the heavy oak doors opened, and the bailiff's voice filled the room. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Wynne." I stood up with everyone else. I smoothed my jacket, and when I sat back down, I caught Evelyn's eye for the first time in over 2 decades. She didn't smile. Neither did I. But I was not afraid. I had not been afraid of her in a very long time. The judge flipped through the thick stack of files on her desk, pushed her silver-rimmed glasses up the bridge of her nose, and looked around the room. Her eyes landed on my side of the aisle. "Mr. Marsh," the judge said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I do not see your counsel present. Are we waiting on someone?" Evelyn's smirk widened. Wyatt let out a short, quiet breath that sounded like a laugh. They thought I was drowning. They thought I didn't have the means or the courage to fight a team of expensive attorneys. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and looked directly into the judge's eyes. "No, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, ringing out clear and hard against the wood paneling. "I will be representing myself." The silence in the room suddenly felt incredibly heavy. Evelyn's smirk vanished instantly. Wyatt sat up straight, his arms dropping to his sides. Arthur swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. They didn't know. They had absolutely no idea who I had become, what I did for a living, or the absolute hellfire I was about to bring down on their heads. "Thank you for being here. Grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen to me tell the whole story." Let me tell you how we got to that courtroom. I was 8 years old that afternoon. My father drove us to the Greyhound station on the east side of Dayton, Ohio. It was 1994, February. That meant the sky was the color of old dishwater, a bleak, unforgiving gray that seemed to press down on the entire city. The wind howled off the concrete, cutting right through the cheap nylon zipper of my winter coat. I remember the heater in Arthur's rusted station wagon was broken, so I was already shivering by the time we pulled into the drop-off lane. My mother, Evelyn, opened the passenger door and pulled me out by the wrist. She didn't look me in the eye. She marched me through the sliding glass doors into the terminal. The air inside smelled of stale cigarette smoke, floor wax, and wet wool. She pointed to a heavy wooden bench positioned near a row of dented metal lockers. "Sit there," she instructed. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "Wait." I sat down, my legs dangling off the edge of the wood. I asked where we were going. "Your father needs to buy the tickets," she said, looking past me toward the ticket counters. "I need to help him. He always gets confused about which window to use. It will take 10 minutes, maybe 15. She reached into her oversized purse, pulled out a crushed, generic brand granola bar, and shoved it into my frozen hands. "Eat this if you get hungry. Do not talk to strangers. Do you understand me, Matthew? Do not move from this bench." "'Kay, Mom," I said. She turned around. She walked through those front doors, got back into the rusted station wagon with Arthur, and drove away. They never came back. I sat on that wooden bench for 4 hours. I remember the exact grain of the wood beneath my hands. I remember the sound of the announcements echoing over the loudspeaker. destinations I had never heard of: Indianapolis, St. Louis, Denver. I ate the granola bar in the first 20 minutes because my stomach was tied in knots, and eating was the only thing that gave my hands something to do. After that, I just watched the sliding glass doors. Families came and went. People dragged heavy suitcases across the scuffed linoleum. A man with a battered guitar case sat 2 benches away and fell asleep, his head resting against the cinderblock wall. An elderly woman in a thick wool coat stopped and asked me 3 different times where my parents were. 3 different times, I told her the exact same lie I was telling myself. "They're just buying tickets," I said, pointing toward the long lines at the far end of the terminal. By the 4th hour, the overhead lights flickered on, buzzing loudly. The terminal began to clear out. The sky outside the glass doors turned from gray to pitch black. My feet were numb. My throat burned. I had stopped saying they were buying tickets. I had stopped looking at the doors. The crushing, suffocating realization began to settle into my small chest. The fear of being entirely unwanted. The agonizing truth that the people who were supposed to protect me from the monsters in the dark had just left me in the dark. A woman named Deborah finally came over. She worked the information window, sitting behind thick pane glass all day answering questions from tired travelers. She had reading glasses pushed up into her frizzy hair and a dark brown coffee stain near the bottom of her employee lanyard. She sat down heavily beside me, the wooden bench groaning under her weight. She asked my name. I told her. She asked who I came with. I told her that too. I told her about the tickets and the 10 minutes. She looked at me, her eyes softening in a way that made my stomach drop. She nodded very carefully. It was the specific way adults nod when they are trying incredibly hard not to show a child that something is catastrophically wrong. "I'm going to make a phone call, sweetie," she said softly. "Would you like another granola bar while we wait?" I said yes, please. I didn't want the food. I just wanted her to stay near me. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. 2 officers with heavy utility belts and radios crackling on their shoulders walked through the doors. Then came Mrs. Higgins, a tired-looking woman from Child Services carrying a thick clipboard. They took me away in the back of a police cruiser. I stared out the window at the dark streets of Dayton, watching the streetlights bleed across the glass. They brought me to a county building. It was a world of harsh fluorescent lighting and hard plastic chairs. The smell of industrial bleach and old paperwork hit me the moment I walked in. They put me in a waiting room with a television mounted far too high in the corner, playing a cartoon with the volume muted. I sat in a blue plastic chair. I kept staring at the heavy wooden door leading to the hallway. I kept thinking Arthur and Evelyn would burst through it, frantic, apologizing, explaining the massive misunderstanding. I was 8 years old. That was the only story I knew how to tell myself to survive the night. I didn't know the system had already opened a file on me. I didn't know the word custody yet, but my custody was now the property of the state of Ohio. I spent 2 days in that building, moved from room to room, asked the same questions by different adults with tired eyes. Nobody came for me. The silence from my family was deafening. Every time a phone rang, my heart hammered against my ribs, but it was never them. I began to shrink into myself. I stopped answering questions. I built a thick, invisible wall around my mind. I decided that if I didn't care about anything, nothing could ever hurt me this badly again. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was still sitting in that sterile waiting area, waiting for Mrs. Higgins to figure out which overcrowded foster home had a spare cot for a silent 8-year-old boy. The door opened, and a man walked in. His name was Elijah Marsh. He was 53 years old, wearing a faded brown corduroy jacket with patches on the elbows. He looked around the room, mildly confused. He volunteered every other Thursday to drive elderly clients from the community center to their medical appointments. He had taken a wrong turn looking for the elevator and ended up in the child services waiting area instead. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. He looked at the empty reception desk. Then he looked at me. I was huddled in the corner chair, knees pulled to my chest, staring a hole into the linoleum floor. Instead of turning around and finding the elevator, Elijah walked slowly across the room. He didn't hover. He didn't give me that look of suffocating pity that everyone else in this building gave me. He just sat down in the plastic chair next to mine. He let the silence hang there for a minute. "Do you know how to play chess?" he asked. His voice was low, gravelly, and completely calm. I slowly shook my head. I didn't speak. "That's fine," he said, not missing a beat. "I can teach you." He reached into the deep pocket of his corduroy jacket and pulled out a small, folding magnetic travel chess set. He opened it on the empty chair between us. The pieces were tiny, chipped plastic. He set up the board meticulously. We played for 40 minutes. Elijah was patient in a way that I had never experienced. He wasn't performing patience for an audience. He wasn't waiting for me to thank him. He was genuinely, entirely unbothered by how long it took me to understand the rules. He explained how the knight moved in an L shape 3 times, never once making me feel stupid for forgetting. When I finally trapped his bishop, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Good instinct," he murmured. When Mrs. Higgins finally rushed into the room, flustered and holding a stack of files to take me to my temporary placement, Elijah didn't just walk away. He stood up, wiped his hands on his trousers, and extended a hand to me. He shook my small hand like I was a grown man. "Keep your eyes on the center of the board, Matthew," he said. I thought I would never see him again. People always left. That was the fundamental rule of my universe. But 6 days later, Elijah showed up at my first foster placement. He had gone through the proper channels, filled out the mountain of background checks, and demanded visitation rights. He brought the magnetic chess set. He brought a library card he had signed up for in my name. For the first time in my life, someone had made a promise to me and actually kept it. Elijah visited me every single week for the next 8 months. He followed me through 2 different emergency placements and 1 move across county lines. During the period where I stopped speaking entirely because I had run out of words that felt safe to say out loud, he just sat with me and moved the wooden pieces across the board. He never pushed. He never demanded gratitude. When I was 9.5, he sat me down on the porch of the group home. He looked me square in the eye. "Matthew, I would like to apply to be your foster parent. I want you to come live with me, but only if you want to. Trust has to be earned. And if I haven't earned yours yet, I understand." I said yes before he could finish the sentence. I moved into his house on a crisp Saturday in October. It was a modest, cream-colored colonial on a quiet, tree-lined street in Centerville. The moment I walked through the door, the smell of cedar wood, old paperbacks, and baking bread enveloped me. Every surface in the house had something interesting on it. A half-finished crossword puzzle, a stack of history books, a coffee mug with a chipped rim. He showed me my room. It had a blue quilt and a lamp shaped like a lighthouse. "It's yours," he said. "Change whatever you want." I never changed a thing. Elijah raised me. He didn't just house me, he taught me how to live. He lived on what I assumed was a very modest salary. He drove a 12-year-old Subaru with a dent in the bumper. He bought his clothes from the sale rack. He fixed the plumbing himself when the pipes leaked. But he made sure I had everything I needed. When I graduated high school, I expected to take out massive loans. Instead, Elijah sat me down at the kitchen table and handed me a folder. He had quietly funded a college fund for me. He paid for my undergraduate degree without mentioning it was a sacrifice. He paid for law school without acting like it was extraordinary. I became a lawyer. Specifically, a family law attorney. I took cases representing kids caught in the crossfire of vicious custody battles. I worked my way up, secured a major promotion at a high-end firm in Columbus, and eventually went out on my own to start my own practice. Elijah was there for all of it. He sat in the 3rd row at my law school graduation, clapping in that contained, sincere way of his. When I was 31, Elijah's health began to fail. He faded quietly, exactly the way he lived. He passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, peaceful in his own bed. The funeral was small. No fanfare. Just the neighbors, some folks from the community center, and me. I stood by his grave, the cold wind whipping around me, feeling an immense, crushing loss. But this time I wasn't an abandoned 8-year-old. I was a man forged by the love of a good father. I packed up his house slowly. I kept the blue quilt. I kept the chess set. I cried exactly as much as I needed to, and then, because Elijah would have demanded it, I got back to work. A week after I packed away the last of Elijah's books, I received a phone call from an attorney named Richard. He handled estate law and told me Elijah had named me as the sole executor and beneficiary of his will. I scheduled a meeting at his office downtown, expecting to sign over a small savings account, maybe the deed to the cream-colored colonial, and close out the final chapter of my father's life. Richard's office was oak-paneled and smelled faintly of expensive leather. He slid a thick, bound folder across the polished desk. Elijah was a very private man, Matthew, Richard said, lacing his fingers together. He gave me strict instructions not to discuss the details of his portfolio with you until he had passed. I frowned, opening the folder. Portfolio? Elijah had a pension and a savings account. Richard offered a small, knowing smile. Elijah Marsh inherited a significant sum from his own father in the 1970s. He never touched the principal. He invested it in index funds, held on to commercial real estate for decades, and co-owned a small manufacturing company that was acquired by a conglomerate when you were in middle school. I stared at the numbers on the page. The columns blurred. I blinked hard, forcing my eyes to focus on the final line at the bottom of the ledger. The number was $3.8 million. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up at Richard, my mind spinning. $3.8 million. This was the man who drove a 12-year-old Subaru. The man who patched the knees of his own corduroy trousers. He had multi-generational wealth, real, substantial money, and he never said a word. He lived a life of total simplicity because he wanted to, not because he had to. He left it all to you, Richard said softly. The inheritance is entirely yours. There are no contingencies. I sat back in the heavy leather chair, the leather creaking under my weight. I didn't care about the money. I honestly didn't. What hit me, what made the tears finally spill over my eyelashes and burn down my cheeks, was the profound, absolute trust. Elijah knew exactly what he was building. He knew exactly what he possessed. And he looked at a broken, silent kid from a bus station and decided I was worthy of his entire legacy. He wanted you to have the freedom to practice law on your own terms, Richard added, handing me a tissue. I signed the paperwork. I transferred the funds. I walked out of that office feeling a heavy, beautiful responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. I was going to honor his name. I was going to make sure the Marsh legacy meant something. But I didn't know that the smell of blood in the water had already attracted the sharks. 6 weeks later, the estate was officially filed in probate court. It's a matter of public record. Anyone who knows where to look can see the filings. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, drinking black coffee and reviewing a brief for a client, when there was a sharp knock at my front door. It was a courier. He handed me a thick manila envelope, asked for my signature, and walked away. The envelope was stamped, certified mail. I walked back into the kitchen, ripping the tab off the top. I pulled out a stack of legal documents. At the top of the first page, printed in bold, black letters, were the names of the plaintiffs, Arthur and Evelyn. My stomach plummeted. The coffee I had just drank turned to acid in my throat. The physical reaction was immediate and violent. My chest tightened, my vision narrowed, and for 3 agonizing seconds, I was 8 years old again, freezing on a wooden bench. I forced myself to breathe. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table until my knuckles turned stark white. I forced my lawyer brain to take over. I read the petition. My biological parents were suing me for the full amount of Elijah's estate. The legal claims were aggressively creative. They argued that as my biological next of kin, they had a prior and superseding claim to any inheritance I received. They argued that because Elijah was unmarried, the estate should revert to them as my original legal guardians of record. They claimed they had never formally consented to my adoption, and that the termination of their parental rights had been handled improperly by the state. I looked at the return address on the envelope. Beaver Creek, Ohio. They lived 20 minutes away. For 22 years, they had lived a 20-minute drive from where they abandoned me. They had been that close the entire time. They never looked for me. They never called. They never cared if I was dead or alive. Until there was $3.8 million on the table. I dropped the papers onto the table. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't sad. The residual trauma of the abandoned child evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, calculating, and absolute fury. The sheer audacity of it. The brazen, disgusting greed. They wanted a fight. They had absolutely no idea who they had just dragged into the ring. Before I drafted a single legal response, I needed to understand their angle. In litigation, if you don't know your enemy's true motivation, you are flying blind. They hadn't cared about me for 2 decades. Why risk exposure now? I put on a dark jacket, grabbed my car keys, and drove out to Beaver Creek. I found the address listed on the court filing. It was a decaying suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where the lawns are overgrown and the siding is peeling off the houses. I parked my car 2 blocks down, under the deep shadow of an old oak tree, and watched their house. I sat there for an hour. Just as I was about to put the car in drive and leave, a car turned the corner. It wasn't a rusted station wagon. It was a brand new, jet black Porsche 911. The engine roared, a deep, aggressive sound that violently shattered the quiet of the neighborhood. The Porsche jerked into the cracked concrete driveway of my parents' house, parking diagonally across the grass. The driver's door swung open. Wyatt stepped out. I recognized him from the few blurry photos I had found online over the years. He was 28 now, the golden boy they kept. He was wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my first car, expensive leather loafers, and a gold watch that caught the streetlights. He looked frantic. The front door of the house flew open. Arthur walked out, looking older, worn down, his shoulders stooped. Evelyn followed close behind, wrapping a cheap cardigan tightly around herself. "I told you not to bring that car here," Arthur hissed, his voice carrying down the quiet street. "It's a rental, old man. I needed it for a client meeting." Wyatt snapped back, slamming the Porsche door. He paced the driveway, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Marcus called again today. The interest is compounding. If you don't get your hands on that money soon, they're going to break my legs, and then they're going to take the house." Evelyn rushed forward, grabbing Wyatt's arm. "We filed the papers, Wyatt. We hired the lawyer you told us to. It's his money, but he's our blood. The court will make him settle. You just have to hold Marcus off a little longer." Wyatt yanked his arm away. "He better settle. $3.8 million. Who the hell leaves that kind of cash to a stray?" I rolled my window up. I had heard enough. The picture was crystal clear. Wyatt was drowning. He had built a fake life of luxury, racked up massive debts with dangerous people, and his parents were desperate to bail out their precious son. They viewed my inheritance, Elijah's legacy, as a winning lottery ticket. They assumed I was a weak, traumatized victim who would settle out of court just to make the nightmare go away. I put the car in gear and drove away. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt surgical. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Carter and Hayes. Carter was one of my closest colleagues in the legal field. We had gone to law school together. While I specialized in family law, Carter had built a reputation as a ruthless shark in high-net-worth divorce and estate litigation. If a billionaire wanted to hide assets from his ex-wife, he called Carter. I sat across from his massive mahogany desk and tossed the lawsuit onto his blotter. Carter picked it up, adjusted his tie, and began to read. Within 30 seconds, he scoffed. Within a minute, he actually laughed out loud. He threw the papers back onto the desk. "This is garbage, Matthew," Carter said, leaning back in his chair. "Genuinely, structurally, they have absolutely nothing. The adoption terminated all biological parental rights. They have zero legal standing to contest a will they aren't named in. Whoever drew this up is either a complete moron or they are counting on you being terrified of court. They're counting on me settling to avoid the public embarrassment," I said quietly. Carter leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Let me take this. I will file a motion to dismiss before lunch. I will drag their attorney in front of the judge and have him sanctioned for frivolous litigation. I'll make them pay my hourly rate just for the privilege of losing. Let me crush them for you, buddy. It was a generous offer. Carter charged $800 an hour. He was offering to obliterate my parents as a favor. I looked at the documents on the desk. I thought about the cold wind at the bus station. I thought about Wyatt standing next to that Porsche, calling me a stray. No, I said. Carter raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I appreciate it, Carter. More than you know, I said, standing up and retrieving the file. But I am not farming this out. I'm not hiding behind a shield. Matthew, rule number 1 of law school. A lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client. You're too close to this. It's too emotional. It's not emotional at all, I replied, my voice completely deadpan. They have been counting on me not knowing things my entire life. They relied on me being weak. If I send you to fight them, they'll think I'm still hiding. I want them to look across the aisle and see exactly who they threw away. Carter studied my face for a long moment. He didn't see a victim. He saw a predator. He slowly nodded. All right, but I'm sitting at your table during prep. You aren't doing the paperwork alone. Deal, I said. I walked out of his office. The defense was set. Now it was time to go on the offensive. I returned to my office and locked the door. I drafted the response to the court. I didn't just deny their claims. I counterclaimed. I filed for legal fees, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I made sure the language was brutal, precise, and completely devoid of emotion. But a legal defense wasn't enough. I didn't just want to win the money. I wanted to burn their entire world to the ground. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I kept encrypted in my contacts. Sarah, I said when the line clicked open. Sarah was a private investigator. She wasn't an ex-cop with a drinking problem. She was a former forensic accountant who tracked dark money for corporate buyouts before going freelance. She was cold, methodical, and arguably the most dangerous person I knew with a laptop. Matthew, she replied. What do you need? I'm sending you 3 names. Arthur, Evelyn, and Wyatt. I need you to run a deep dive background check. Financials, debts, associates. Find out exactly who Wyatt owes money to. Easy enough. What else? I paused, looking at the chess set sitting on the corner of my desk. I picked up the Black Knight, rolling the cool wood between my fingers. I need you to go backward. Go back 22 years. Montgomery County, 1994. I need you to pull every single public and private record attached to my biological parents from the 6 months before they abandoned me to the 2 years after. Tax returns, bank statements, police logs, everything. Sarah was silent for a second. She knew my history. You think they hid something? They left an 8-year-old at a bus station, Sarah. People don't do that just because they are poor. They do that because they have a plan. I want to know what the plan was. Give me a week, she said and hung up. I set the knight back on the board. The opening gambit was played. I spent the next 11 days working my regular caseload, maintaining complete radio silence with my parents. Their lawyer sent 3 different emails offering to settle the matter privately for 40% of the estate. I deleted every single one without replying. I wanted them sweating. I wanted Wyatt's creditors breathing down his neck. I was building a trap and they were walking right into it. On the 11th day, Sarah walked into my office. It was raining outside, and her trench coat was dripping water onto my hardwood floor. She didn't say hello. She didn't offer a sympathetic smile. She walked straight to my desk, pulled a thick, yellowed manila folder out of her leather bag, and dropped it heavily right in front of me. You were right, Sarah said, pulling up a chair and crossing her arms. They didn't just abandon you. They monetized you. I stopped typing on my laptop. The room felt suddenly very cold. I reached out and opened the folder. The first document was a photocopy of a police report filed with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department. The date in the top right corner caught my eye immediately. It was February 14th, 1994, the exact same evening they left me at the Greyhound station. I read the narrative section, typed out on an old typewriter. Reporting parties, Arthur and Evelyn, state that their son, Matthew, age 8, ran away from home at approximately 6 p.m. Parents claim they searched the neighborhood but could not locate the child. They filed a missing persons report. I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Keep reading, Sarah said flatly. I scanned down to the description section. It detailed my height, my weight, the clothes I was wearing. And then, there was a section labeled, Additional Notes. Parents described the child as severely troubled. History of running away. History of violent outbursts and severe behavioral problems. Child is uncooperative and prone to hiding. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. A violent outburst? I was a quiet kid whose biggest disciplinary issue in 3rd grade was reading a comic book under my desk during math class. They lied. They painted me as a delinquent so the police wouldn't look too hard. They gave the authorities an excuse to write me off as a runaway who didn't want to be found. They covered their tracks, I said, turning the page. They made sure no one would connect an abandoned kid at a bus station downtown with a troubled runaway from the suburbs. That was just step 1 to establish the narrative, Sarah pointed out, tapping the folder. Look at the next document. Look at what they did next. I flipped to the next section of the file. It was a contract from a mid-level insurance firm based out of Chicago. It was a life insurance policy. The policy was taken out 18 months before they dropped me at the station. The insured party was me. The beneficiaries were Arthur and Evelyn. They insured a child? I asked, looking up at Sarah. It's not entirely uncommon to get small burial policies for kids, Sarah explained, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. But look at the riders. Look at the specific clauses. I dragged my finger down the dense legal text until I hit a highlighted section. The policy included a specific contingency clause for a payout in the event of a prolonged disappearance, meeting the legal threshold for presumed death. I flipped to the very last page in the folder. It was a copy of a cleared bank check. It was dated exactly 2 years and 1 month after the night at the bus station. The check was made out to Arthur and Evelyn. The amount was $62,000. I stared at the numbers. $62,000. I let the reality of those digits wash over me. They didn't just walk away because they couldn't afford to feed me. They didn't make a terrible mistake under unimaginable pressure. They planned it. They took out the policy. They waited for the waiting period to clear. They drove me to a bus station, dumped me like garbage, drove straight to a police precinct to file a fake report, and then waited 2 years to declare me legally dead. They committed insurance fraud. They sold my life, my safety, and my sanity for $62,000 to pay off their debts and keep their golden boy Wyatt comfortable. I closed the folder. I rested my hands flat on top of the cardboard. I didn't feel devastated. I didn't feel broken. I felt a sense of ultimate, terrifying clarity. The final puzzle piece had clicked into place. They weren't just terrible parents. They were felons. They had committed grand larceny, insurance fraud, and filed false police reports. And now, 22 years later, these same felons had walked into a court of law to demand another $3 million from the ghost they created. Sarah, I said, looking up at her. My voice was dangerously calm. Yeah. Make 3 copies of this entire file. Put them in sealed binders. I looked down at the folder, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. I had the ultimate weapon. They had handed me the gun, loaded the chamber, and pointed it at their own heads. All I had to do was pull the trigger in front of the judge. We are back in the present. The courtroom of the Honorable Judge Patricia Wynne. The heavy wooden doors were closed, sealing us inside a space where only the law mattered. I sat alone at the defendant's table. Across the aisle, Arthur, Evelyn, and Wyatt sat behind their hired attorney, a man named Vance. Vance wore a suit that looked expensive from a distance but was shiny at the elbows up close. He had the kind of aggressive, overly confident posture typical of a lawyer who usually handled messy divorce settlements by bullying the opposing counsel into submission. Judge Wynne folded her hands on her desk and looked down at Vance. "Counselor," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a razor. "I have read your initial filings. I am struggling to find the legal standing for your clients to contest this will. Please, enlighten the court." Vance stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a practiced flick of his wrist. He didn't look at me. He looked at the judge, flashing a smile that was entirely out of place. "Your Honor, we are here today to correct a profound injustice," Vance began, his voice booming dramatically. "My clients, Arthur and Evelyn, are the biological parents of the defendant. They share a bond of blood, an unbreakable biological imperative. It is our assertion that the late Elijah Marsh, while serving as a guardian, circumvented standard custody protocols. Because of this, my clients maintain their status as the rightful next of kin. Therefore, the inheritance left by Mr. Marsh should rightly be placed in a trust managed by his original biological family." I listened to him speak, keeping my face completely blank. It was a masterclass in legal fiction. He was throwing emotional buzzwords at the wall, hoping something would stick. He talked about family values. He talked about the tragic separation of a child from his parents. He painted Arthur and Evelyn as grieving victims of a flawed system. Behind him, Wyatt leaned back in his chair. He crossed one leg over the other, adjusting his gold watch. He shot a glance in my direction and actually smirked. He looked like a man deciding what color boat he was going to buy with my salary. "Is that the entirety of your argument, Mr. Vance?" Judge Wynn asked. She did not look impressed. "We believe the biological tie supersedes an adoption decree that was finalized without my client's explicit presence, Your Honor," Vance said, puffing out his chest. Judge Wynn turned her gaze to me. "Mr. Marsh, your response." I stood up slowly. I didn't rush. I arranged my perfectly aligned files on the table. I looked at Vance. Then I looked at Evelyn and Arthur. They stared back, their eyes greedy, hungry, waiting for me to crack under the pressure. They still thought I was the silent 8-year-old kid who didn't know how to fight back. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Opposing counsel's argument is not just legally flawed. It is fundamentally absurd." I direct the court's attention to Exhibit A in my response brief. The official adoption decree from Montgomery County, dated October 12, 1996. I held up the document. Under Ohio state law, the finalization of a legal adoption permanently severs all legal ties, rights, and privileges of the biological parents. They are legally considered strangers to me. They have no standing to request visitation, no standing to claim custody, and absolutely zero standing to contest a legally sound will executed by my adoptive father. I watched Vance's confidence begin to chip away. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Furthermore, I continued, pacing slightly in front of my table. The assertion that they were not present for the termination of their parental rights is a matter of public record. They were not present because they abandoned me at a Greyhound bus station in 1994 and never returned. The state terminated their rights due to gross neglect and abandonment. They cannot now, 22 years later, claim a legal right to a $3.8 million inheritance simply because they share my DNA. I spoke for exactly 9 minutes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I used the precision and clarity that Elijah had taught me. I dismantled every single one of Vance's arguments using cold, hard statutes. I built a wall of legal precedent so thick that a tank couldn't drive through it. When I finished my rebuttal, I looked over at the plaintiff's table. Wyatt's smirk was gone. His leg was bouncing nervously under the table. Evelyn's knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the wooden bench. Judge Wynn nodded slowly. "Mr. Marsh makes a compelling, fact-based argument, Mr. Vance. Your claims appear entirely without merit." "Your Honor, if I may," Vance stammered, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing his forehead. "We merely seek equitable distribution." "I am not finished, Your Honor," I interrupted, my voice slicing through Vance's panic. The courtroom went dead silent. I reached down and picked up the 3 thick, sealed binders Sarah had prepared for me. I walked over to the bailiff and handed them to him. He carried one up to the judge and placed the other on the table right in front of Vance. "Your Honor," I said, standing tall in the center of the room. "The plaintiffs have filed a frivolous lawsuit in an attempt to extort money from my father's estate. But that is the least of their crimes. I have submitted into evidence a comprehensive investigative report detailing the events of February 14, 1994. Vance opened the binder. He flipped to the first page. I watched the color rapidly drain from his face. On the night my biological parents abandoned me, they drove directly to the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department. They filed a false police report, claiming I was a troubled runaway who had fled our home. They falsified my behavioral history to ensure the police would not search aggressively. Arthur gasped loudly. It was a sharp, guttural sound of pure terror. Evelyn slapped her hand over her mouth. I didn't stop. I looked directly at Wyatt, locking eyes with the golden boy who was watching his entire life evaporate. 18 months prior to abandoning me, Arthur and Evelyn took out a life insurance policy on my life. The policy included a specific rider for a payout in the event of a prolonged disappearance. Exactly 2 years and 1 month after they dumped me at that bus station, they filed a claim asserting I was legally dead. Judge Wynn flipped rapidly through the binder, her eyes scanning the highlighted bank check. Her expression, usually a mask of judicial neutrality, morphed into absolute, unadulterated disgust. They collected a payout of $62,000. I stated, my voice echoing off the walls. They did not lose a child. They liquidated an asset. They committed felony insurance fraud, grand larceny, and filed false reports to federal and state agencies. They built their lives and funded their younger son's lifestyle on blood money. And now, they have walked into this courtroom to try and steal from the man who actually saved my life. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was the sound of a trap snapping entirely shut. Vance was hyperventilating. He looked at the documents, looked at Arthur and Evelyn, and then looked at the judge. He was a sleazy lawyer, but he wasn't stupid. He realized instantly that his clients had used him to facilitate a shakedown, and they had just exposed him to massive liability and potential disbarment. "Your Honor," Vance basically shouted, his voice cracking. He practically threw the binder down on the table, stepping away from Arthur and Evelyn like they were radioactive. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of this. None whatsoever. These documents were never disclosed to me during discovery. My clients lied to me." "Sit down, Mr. Vance," Judge Wynn commanded, her voice like thunder. Vance collapsed into his chair, wiping his sweating face with his hands. Wyatt jumped to his feet. "This is fake," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He forged those papers. He's just trying to keep the money." "Bailiff, secure that man," Judge Wynn ordered immediately. The bailiff stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Wyatt's shoulder and forcing him back into his seat. Wyatt looked at his parents, his eyes wide with panic. "Tell them it's a lie. Dad, tell them." Arthur couldn't speak. He was staring blankly at the floor, his chest heaving. Evelyn was quietly sobbing, her face buried in her hands. They knew it was over. Every dark secret they had buried 22 years ago was now sitting under the bright fluorescent lights of a federal courtroom. Judge Wynn closed the binder. She folded her hands and looked directly at the plaintiff's table. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a display of such profound depravity," Judge Wynn said, her voice shaking with restrained anger. "The claims brought forth by the plaintiffs are dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay all legal fees and court costs incurred by the defendant." She picked up her gavel, but she didn't strike the sounding block yet. She looked at me. "Mr. Marsh, I am taking possession of this evidence. I am personally forwarding this entire file to the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office, as well as the State Insurance Fraud Investigation Unit. I am strongly recommending immediate criminal prosecution." She slammed the gavel down. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. "We are adjourned." The courtroom erupted into chaotic movement. Vance scrambled to pack his briefcase, practically sprinting down the aisle to get away from his former clients. Two court officers moved quickly toward the plaintiff's table to detain Arthur and Evelyn for questioning based on the judge's orders. I calmly packed my legal pads and my laptop into my briefcase. I clicked the locks shut. As I turned to walk down the center aisle, my path was blocked. Evelyn had pulled herself away from the officers for just a second. She stood in front of me. Her face was streaked with cheap mascara. Her hands were trembling violently. She looked up at me, and for a split second, I saw the mother I used to know. I saw the woman who used to read me bedtime stories before the money ran out and the darkness took over. She reached her hand out, her fingers hovering just inches from my suit jacket. "Matthew," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please." We were desperate. We didn't know what to do. "You're my son. You have to help us. Please, don't let them take us away." She was looking for a lifeline. She was hoping that somewhere, buried deep inside my chest, there was still a frightened 8-year-old boy who just wanted his mother to love him. She was hoping for a moment of weakness, a drop of shared blood to save her from the consequences of her own actions. I stopped. I looked down at her. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hatred. I felt an overwhelming, profound emptiness. "You are mistaken," I said, my voice completely flat. "Your son is sitting right behind you." I stepped around her. I didn't look back. I walked down the long aisle, pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and stepped out into the marble hallway. I walked out of the courthouse and onto the front steps. The sky above Ohio was a brilliant, blinding blue. The wind was warm. For the first time in 22 years, I took a deep breath, and the air actually reached the bottom of my lungs. The phantom weight I had been carrying my entire life, the feeling of being unworthy, the lingering fear of the dark, was completely gone. I was free. Time moves quickly when you are no longer chained to the past. 6 months later, the legal machinery we set in motion that day in court reached its inevitable conclusion. The district attorney did not offer a plea deal. They brought the hammer down. Arthur and Evelyn were indicted on multiple felony counts of insurance fraud, conspiracy, and filing false police reports. Because the crime involved the fraudulent exploitation of a minor, the judge showed absolutely no leniency during sentencing. They were both handed significant prison terms. The house in Beaver Creek was seized by the state to pay back the insurance company, along with decades of compounded interest. As for Wyatt, his world collapsed with spectacular speed. Without his parents' home to borrow against, and without the $3 million he was banking on, his creditors closed in. I heard through Carter that Wyatt's shiny black Porsche was repossessed in the middle of the night. He was evicted from his luxury apartment. For about 3 weeks, my phone rang constantly from unknown numbers. It was Wyatt, leaving increasingly frantic, desperate voicemails. He begged for a loan. He begged for a job at my firm. He cursed me, then cried, then pleaded. I never answered. I never called back. I eventually changed my number. You cannot save a man who is determined to drown, especially when he expects you to act as his raft. They made their choices. I let them live with the results. I didn't let the inheritance sit in an index fund. Elijah had given me the tools to build a life, but he also gave me the resources to build a legacy. In the spring, I filed the paperwork to establish the Elijah Marsh Foundation. I took a massive portion of the inheritance and placed it into an irrevocable trust. The foundation had one specific, unwavering mission: providing elite, pro bono legal representation to children trapped in the foster care system. I hired Carter to handle the financial structuring, finally giving him a chance to bill me his ridiculous hourly rate. We built a network of aggressive family law attorneys who stepped into custody battles, abuse hearings, and placement disputes to make sure no child was ever left undefended in a room full of tired adults. We even established a dedicated college fund program for kids who aged out of the system, giving them the same head start Elijah had given me. On the day we officially opened the foundation's office downtown, I took my first case personally. I walked into a sterile county building, navigating the same harsh fluorescent lighting and smells of floor wax I remembered from my own childhood. I walked into an interview room. Sitting at the table was a 10-year-old boy. He was clutching a ragged backpack, staring down at the scuffed linoleum floor, completely silent. I sat down in the chair across from him. I didn't push. I didn't ask him how he was feeling. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out Elijah's old, chipped magnetic travel chess set. I opened the board and placed it between us. "Do you know how to play chess?" I asked quietly. The boy slowly shook his head. "That's fine," I said, offering him a small smile. "I can teach you." I sit in my office now, looking out over the city skyline. My law firm has grown. I recently secured a promotion to senior partner, but my real work, my life's work, happens through the foundation. On the corner of my large oak desk sits that same magnetic chess set. It is permanently set up mid-game. It serves as a constant reminder of how incredibly fragile a human life is, and how easily the trajectory of that life can be altered by a single choice. Arthur and Evelyn chose a check for $62,000. They chose to protect themselves. They chose to look at a terrified 8-year-old boy and see nothing but a liability. Elijah Marsh took a wrong turn looking for an elevator. He saw a broken kid sitting in a plastic chair. He didn't have to stop. He didn't have to stay. But he pulled a chess set out of his pocket and made a different choice. He chose patience. He chose love. Blood does not make a family. Blood is just biology. Family is the people who choose to sit next to you in the dark. Family is the people who show up when there is absolutely nothing to gain. They thought they broke me at that bus station. They thought they destroyed my future. But all they did was clear the board so a real father could sit down and teach me how to win the game. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a heavy journey, but getting it out into the open feels like putting down a weight I've carried for decades. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics are rarely simple, and sometimes the hardest thing in the world is learning to walk away from the people who are supposed to protect you. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you had to choose your own peace over toxic family members? If you made it all the way to the end of this video, I want you to comment the letter W below. That stands for winner. It's our secret code for the 1% Club, the group of amazing people who actually watch until the very last second. When I see that W, I'll know exactly who my true supporters are. Please hit that like button if the story meant something to you, and don't forget to follow the channel so we can keep sharing these journeys together. I appreciate you all. See you in the next one.